You know that feeling when you finally think you caught a break? Yeah, me too. For about 3 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway of my new house, deep in the sleepy suburbs, I actually breathed out. Like, really breathed out. This was supposed to be my low-profile gig. A simple relocation for work, a modest house, a backyard big enough to pretend I cared about gardening, and neighbors who, hopefully, wouldn't mistake my privacy for an open invitation to potlucks. From the outside, this neighborhood looked, well, normal. Not Stepford-level creepy. The lawns were mowed, but not with ruler precision. The houses weren't color-coded like crayons. There were no golden retrievers wearing matching sweaters with their owners. It all screamed, "We are too tired to micromanage your fence height." Perfect. I even thought to myself, finally, a place without one of those maniacal HOAs. Oh, sweet summer child. The house was fine. Nothing fancy. Brick exterior, wide porch, a few stubborn rose bushes someone had given up on years ago. I didn't care. I wasn't here for the aesthetics. I had a job to finish, and a few months of pretending to be an average Joe with a penchant for cargo shorts was exactly what the doctor ordered. Or so I thought. My first few days were blissfully uneventful. I set up my gear inside. Things the average person would mistake for techie stuff, but which could, with a few commands, track an entire town's phone signals. You know, hobbies. I even started to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, I could finish my project without having to resort to other skills. The ones I didn't advertise. But then, day 4 happened. I was already running late. I had a meet across town, and, because I have the organizational skills of a caffeinated squirrel, I forgot an important flash drive back inside. I pulled a lazy U-turn, jogged into the house, grabbed the drive, maybe 30 seconds, tops, and when I came back out, there they were. 3 guys, standing around my car like they were inspecting a UFO. Matching dark polo shirts, HOA enforcement, emblazoned across the chest like they were some low-rent SWAT team. One of them was even carrying a flashlight. At noon, I stood there for a second, half wondering if I had slipped into some weird HOA-themed nightmare. Then I remembered. Nope, awake. Sadly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, slapping on my best friendly new neighbor voice. You know, the one that's just dripping with "I'm too polite to call you idiots" out loud. The 3 of them turned toward me like a pack of dogs sniffing a stranger. One of them, the leader, squared his shoulders and said, "Routine check. Just making sure there's nothing suspicious." I blinked. "In my car." He nodded. "Right." I forced a smile. "Well, I can assure you there's nothing illegal in there. But if you're that worried, I'd be happy to call the police and let them double check. You know, just to be thorough." You could practically hear the record scratch. They didn't like that. Not even a little. The leader's nostrils flared. Another one shuffled his feet like he was debating whether it was worth arguing. In the end, they just exchanged some long, meaningful glances, the kind middle school girls use before starting drama, and muttered something about keeping an eye out before sauntering off. I watched them go, filing away every detail. Matching uniforms. Radio earpieces. Real, industrial-grade flashlights. This wasn't your typical clipboard-wielding HOA Karen with a vendetta about mailbox heights. This was something else. Still, I had bigger problems on my plate. Namely, a deadline I couldn't afford to miss. So I shook it off, got in my car, and drove off to work. Later that night, after another exhausting day spent pretending to be normal, I sat in my living room, sipping a lukewarm beer, and stared out at the street. I saw them again. The same 3, plus a couple more, prowling around other houses, standing way too close to windows, peering into mailboxes, harassing a teenager for parking half an inch over the curb. And the worst part? Nobody said a word. The neighbors would just lower their heads, shuffle back inside, and pretend not to see anything. What the hell kind of HOA was this? I made a mental note. Deal with them. Later. Drawing attention right now would be a disaster for my project. The kind of disaster where black vans and men in darker suits start asking way too many questions. So I waited. And so did they. The second run-in happened 3 days later. By then, I had officially upgraded these clowns from mild inconvenience to potential health hazard. I came home a little earlier than usual. Nothing fancy, just a long, mind-numbing day of pretending to be a boring IT consultant. I was dreaming about a frozen pizza and a cheap action movie when I turned onto my street. And froze. There they were again. My personal HOA stalker squad, huddled around the side of my house, poking around my hydrangeas like they expected to find a meth lab under the mulch. I killed the engine and stepped out of the car, plastering on the same friendly smile I used for airport security and nosy neighbors. You know, the "I'm so harmless you could leave your kids with me" smile. "Afternoon, gentlemen," I called out, walking up the driveway with all the casual ease of a man who definitely didn't have classified equipment hidden inside his basement. "What brings you to my little patch of paradise?" The leader straightened up and dusted imaginary dirt off his pants. "Routine inspection," he said. His voice was tight, like he was forcing the words through gritted teeth. "Safety hazards. Could be anything." I glanced pointedly at the hydrangeas they were trampling. "Well, if my hydrangeas have become a national security threat, I sincerely apologize," I said deadpan. "They do tend to get a little aggressive this time of year." For half a second, it almost looked like one of them was about to lunge at me. But then, like divine intervention from the gods of dramatic timing, one of their phones rang. Loudly. An obnoxious ringtone that somehow screamed bad decisions and worse consequences. He glanced at the screen and paled a little. "It's Karen," he said, like he'd just said it's Satan. The others immediately straightened up. One muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "We'll finish this later." They shot me a series of looks that were one part warning, one part wounded pride, and two parts, "We're too dumb to come up with a good comeback." And then they left, like a pack of wolves reluctantly abandoning a steak. I stood there for a moment, watching them retreat, and couldn't help but chuckle. Karen. Because of course her name was Karen. And she wasn't just a Karen. No, she was the Karen, queen of this HOA kingdom. And if her little foot soldiers were any indication, she ruled it with an iron clipboard. Over the next week, I saw it firsthand. Karen marched around the neighborhood like a discount dictator, issuing fines and warnings for offenses like having a slightly faded mailbox or wind chimes that were too loud. She had a walkie-talkie, for God's sake, and a clipboard, always the clipboard, like it gave her magical HOA powers. It was almost impressive in a horrifying, watching a train wreck kind of way. And her brothers? Her personal HOA enforcement police. They were the muscle. The ones who made sure you voluntarily paid your violation fees. The ones who made sure you knew that requests weren't optional. I kept my head down, played the game, smiled politely, mowed the lawn, nodded to neighbors. But I watched. I heard them chase an old man in the street until he quietly sold his house and left. I heard them yell at a single mom because her kid left a bike on the sidewalk. I heard them intimidate a nice old couple until they stopped putting up Christmas lights. The whole neighborhood was living in fear. Except me. And, apparently, that bothered them. Because nothing says power trip like realizing there's someone you can't control. Someone who doesn't flinch when you puff out your chest and bark made-up rules. My friends didn't help, either. See, part of my cover involved the occasional visit from some old buddies. Guys who, if you squinted, looked like your average blue-collar workers. Jeans, ball caps, worn boots. The kind of men who could be fixing your plumbing, or, storming an embassy. Karen and her brothers hated them instantly. I could see it every time. The barely concealed scowls. The whispers into walkie-talkies. The frantic scribbling on clipboards. Because no matter how hard they stared, no matter how many times they circled the block, they could smell it. These guys weren't afraid. And that scared the hell out of them. Good. I had bigger fish to fry. My project was nearing the endgame. We were gathering for final planning soon, and the last thing I needed was for Captain Clipboard and her Barney Fife brigade to screw it all up. Which, of course, meant that they absolutely would. Because if there's one thing you can always count on, it's that people drunk on fake power will always push their luck. And when they did, well, let's just say I wasn't planning to bake them a welcome basket. We planned the meeting for late in the evening, after the sun had dipped low and the neighborhood had tucked itself in for the night. It was supposed to be simple, quiet, Efficient. We gathered in my living room, just a few of us, my friends from out of town. To the untrained eye, we were nothing more than a bunch of guys nursing beers and debating football stats. Nothing suspicious at all. If you ignored the secured laptops, encrypted phones, and the subtle way we each sat so we could see every entrance and window. We were almost done finalizing the last pieces of our operation, the real reason I was here, when it happened. Knock, knock. There was nothing casual about it. No timid tap-tap of a neighbor dropping off cookies. This was the kind of knock that promised paperwork, threats, and bad breath. I exchanged a look with the guys. Silent agreement passed between us. I walked to the door and opened it. And there they were. The HOA goon squad. All 5 of them this time. Matching HOA enforcement, polos stretched over various shades of middle-aged aggression. And let me tell you, they weren't exactly hiding their intentions. The leader, the same guy from my car inspection, sneered at me like I was an overdue parking ticket. Evening, he said, voice dripping with false cheer. Mind if we come in? Before I could answer, not that I was about to say yes, they pushed past me, not even bothering with pretense anymore. My hand twitched slightly. Old habits die hard, but I caught myself. Maintain cover. For now. They spread out, looking around like they expected to find stolen government secrets taped to the ceiling fans. What's this? One of them sneered, motioning to my laptop. Some kind of hacker setup? Another leaned into one of my friend's faces, grinning like a jackal. Boys club? Looks shady. Yeah, chimed in a third, snickering. If nothing illegal's going on, we're sure we can find something. They laughed. That ugly, triumphant laugh people make when they think they've already won. I smiled pleasantly. A smile that, if they had 2 brain cells to rub together, should have sent them sprinting for the nearest exit. Gentlemen, I said calmly, I'm sure whatever hallucination you're having right now can be solved with some fresh air and basic literacy. The leader scowled. You think this is a joke? He shoved one of my friends, Mike, hard enough to send him stumbling back a step. Wrong move. Mike had reflexes like a rattlesnake. Before the goon could blink, Mike twisted, grabbed the guy's wrist, and dropped him to the ground with a neat pop of the elbow. The others started shouting, lunging forward. I sighed. Guess it's time for a practical demonstration, I muttered. 20 seconds. Maybe less. That's all it took. 5 grown men, trained in the ancient art of harassing grandmothers about garden gnomes, now lay on my living room floor, hogtied with zip ties and gagged with duct tape. One of them let out a muffled mmrrphhh that sounded suspiciously like Mom, but it was hard to tell through the layers of tape. I stepped back and surveyed the scene. Hydrangeas, 1. HOA thugs, 0. Well, said Mike, stretching casually, that escalated. Wasn't even a workout, another one of the guys joked, nudging one of the groaning enforcers with his boot. I crouched down in front of the leader. His face was purple with rage, muffled screams straining against the tape. Now, I said, all polite-like, I was willing to let you people live in your little fantasy world. I really was. You want to cosplay as mall cops and harass people about mailbox colors? Go nuts. I leaned closer. But you made it my problem. And that was a bad idea. I stood up, brushing dust off my jeans. Mike looked at me. What's the plan? Dump them in the bushes and leave a note for Karen. Tempting, I admitted, but no. We need them off the board until tomorrow. Our project was too close to completion to risk interference now. One idiot making a phone call could tank months of work. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick, coded message. 10 minutes later, a dark, nondescript van rolled up outside. 2 more of our guys hopped out. Professionals, the kind of men who could move a piano, a sofa, or 5 zip-tied morons without breaking a sweat. They moved fast. Efficient. Like furniture removal, but with more screaming and less IKEA frustration. We loaded the HOA police into the van, locked it down, and sent it rolling off to a secure holding location, somewhere nice, cozy, and full of federal agents very eager to hear about HOA tax collection practices. I turned back toward my house, stretched, and finally cracked open that pizza I'd been dreaming about. Through the window, I could see the neighborhood. Quiet. Calm. unaware that, for the first time in a long time, the monsters were no longer in charge. Tomorrow would be the real show. And something told me Queen Karen wasn't going to like the ending. Not one bit. The morning after was almost too quiet. You ever walk into a room where someone just had a massive argument, but everyone's pretending everything's fine? Yeah, that was the vibe crawling over the neighborhood. The usual roving HOA patrol was nowhere to be seen. No idiot with a flashlight inspecting mailboxes. No clipboard warriors measuring grass blades with rulers. Just silence. Beautiful, suspicious silence. But down the street, Karen stormed around like a hornet on Red Bull. Phone pressed to her ear, barking into it, gesturing wildly at random neighbors who practically tripped over themselves to get away. Every 5 minutes, she'd redial. Every 5 minutes, she got no answer. Huh. Wonder why your enforcers aren't picking up, Karen. Real mystery. By noon, the whole street was buzzing with nervous energy. Neighbors peeking through blinds. Kids playing unusually close to their houses. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. And then they arrived. 2 blacked-out sedans and a nondescript van rolled slowly down the street. Government plates. Tinted windows. You could practically hear every lawnmower and leaf blower sputter to a halt as they passed. Even the wind seemed to take a coffee break. Old man Jenkins, watering his patchy lawn, forgot he was holding a hose. It drooped to the ground and started soaking his sneaker, but he didn't even blink. Just stared. The sedans and van glided to a stop right in front of Karen's house. A faux Victorian monstrosity that screamed, "I have very strong opinions about your recycling bins." 3 men and 1 woman stepped out. Suits. Badges. Serious faces. They didn't strut. They didn't swagger. They didn't need to. Their calm, deliberate movements were enough to send a message. We're not here to argue about the color of your shutters. We're here to dismantle your life. Karen flung open her door before they even knocked, still barking into her phone. When she saw them, she puffed up like an angry rooster. First, the agents flashed their badges. Second, Karen's face did this incredible thing where it turned ghost pale and blotchy red at the same time. Third, she started arguing, waving her arms, probably quoting whatever imaginary laws she thought made her supreme empress of the HOA. The lead agent just listened patiently, nodded once, and then pointed inside. Karen tried one last time to slam the door in their faces. Big mistake. One of the agents casually wedged his foot into the gap, and just like that, the dream of Karenland crumbled. They entered the house. The door shut behind them. The neighborhood collectively held its breath. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10, 20. The tension was thicker than Karen's makeup. Finally, the door opened, and there she was. Karen, the once proud queen, now looking like someone had run her soul through a garbage disposal. Her hair was mussed. Her face had sagged like a melted candle. She wasn't arguing anymore. She wasn't yelling. She was shuffling, head down, as the agents gently but firmly guided her into the back of one of the sedans. The sight was almost spiritual. The cars rolled away, slow and silent. And for a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was like the entire block was trying to figure out if they'd just witnessed a miracle. Finally, Old Man Jenkins broke the silence, his voice cracking. Did we just get free? No one answered immediately. Then, Mrs. Ramirez, the sweet lady who'd once been fined for planting sunflowers without prior written HOA authorization, stepped onto her porch. Maybe, she said cautiously. Another neighbor piped up. Someone find out what the hell just happened. At that moment, I pulled my truck slowly into my driveway, having just gotten back from a hardware store run. Totally coincidental timing, right? I stepped out and was immediately swarmed. Hey, new guy. Jenkins called. You see what happened to Karen? I shrugged, casual. Oh, her? Yeah. She and her brothers are going away for a long time. The silence that followed was deafening. You know this how? Mrs. Ramirez asked, eyes narrowing suspiciously, but also with a dangerous amount of hope. I smiled lazily, reaching into my jacket, and pulled out a badge. The reactions were chef's kiss. One neighbor gasped so hard I thought they might pass out. Another literally dropped their coffee cup. Jenkins actually stepped backward like he was afraid I'd start arresting random people for jaywalking. I held up my free hand, laughing. Relax. I'm off duty. Mostly. Then added with a wink. At least until the paperwork clears. It took about 3 heartbeats. And then, pandemonium. People cheered. Actual, honest-to-God cheers. Someone blasted music from a porch speaker. Mrs. Ramirez started dancing. And let me tell you, for someone with 2 hip replacements, the lady had moves. Within minutes, someone broke out a grill. Someone else dragged coolers of beer and soda onto their lawn. The day of Karen's fall officially became a block party. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops and laughter and music filled the air, I leaned against my truck, sipping a beer, and watched the neighborhood come back to life. For the first time in a long time, they weren't afraid. The party lasted until well past midnight. Turns out, when you lift the iron boot of an oppressive HOA dictatorship off a neighborhood, people rediscover what it means to have fun. Who knew? There were fire pits blazing in backyards. Someone set up an impromptu karaoke stage on a front porch. Jenkins absolutely butchered Sweet Caroline, but nobody cared. Kids ran wild, dogs barked, and for once, laughter echoed down the streets louder than Karen's shrieking had ever managed. It was glorious. A few neighbors cautiously approached me during the evening, clutching red Solo cups like nervous freshmen at a frat party. "So you're like FBI?" one of them asked, eyes wide. "Something like that," I said with a smile that suggested they didn't really want the full answer. They didn't. "And Karen's really gone?" I nodded. "Charged with enough counts of fraud, intimidation, and misuse of community funds to keep a legal team employed until the sun burns out." A cheer broke out spontaneously at that. Apparently, news travels fast when you remove the neighborhood tyrant. One of the teenagers, a lanky kid with a skateboard, fist-bumped me on the way by. "You're like John Wick, but for HOAs," he said, dead serious. I laughed, but didn't correct him. Not entirely wrong. Later, after most of the grills had cooled and the kids were finally passed out on porch swings, my just friends drifted over to my truck. Mike leaned against the tailgate, grinning. Not bad for a low-profile assignment. "Yeah," I said, stretching lazily. Nothing like a hostile HOA takeover to liven up a quiet relocation. "Another one," Rick chuckled. "You think Karen's plotting her comeback from a holding cell?" "Let her try," I said deadpan. "I've got more zip ties." The guys laughed, that low, knowing laugh you only hear from people who've seen, and caused, a lot of chaos together. We shared a few quiet moments, watching the stars spin slowly overhead. "Seriously," Mike said, voice low. "You staying put for a while?" I considered it. Technically, my assignment was wrapping up. The target we'd been tracking, the real reason I'd been planted in suburbia, had been apprehended. Clean, silent, and efficient. Mission accomplished. Which meant I could move on. But looking around at the grinning neighbors, the fire pits, the late-night guitar playing, maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't hurt to stay a little longer. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I'll stick around." "Good," Rick said. "You deserve a break." "And hey," Mike added with a smirk, "this place might need a new HOA president. Someone's got to keep the hydrangeas under control." I laughed. Hard. The next morning, the neighborhood was hungover but happy. No HOA patrols. No fake fines. No Karen. Just the gentle hum of lawnmowers, the clink of coffee mugs, and the smell of fresh-cut grass. A few neighbors waved as I walked to my mailbox. My perfectly regulation-approved mailbox, I might add, and I waved back. Mrs. Ramirez stopped me halfway down the block. "We're thinking of starting a real community board," she said, beaming. "Something fair. Maybe you could, help organize?" I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to help run an HOA?" She laughed. "No. No rules about mailbox colors or fines for garden gnomes. Just neighbors helping neighbors." I pretended to think it over. "Well," I said finally, "as long as nobody tries to tell me my hydrangeas are plotting an uprising, I'm in." She grinned and patted my arm. "Deal." As I walked back to my house, I caught sight of something tucked behind a neighbor's bush, an old, battered clipboard. Karen's clipboard. I picked it up, studying the cracked plastic, the faded checklist of violations written in all caps. I smirked, twirled it once like a gunslinger spinning his revolver, and tossed it into my trash can. Long live the king. Or in this case, long live the neighborhood. Because this time, it wasn't ruled by fear. It was ruled by fire pits, freedom, and the knowledge that if another Karen ever rose up, well, they'd find out the hard way that the new guy wasn't just good at trimming hydrangeas. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.